Make it work, make it run when your code is done. Share it with everyone. Bug reports, pull requests, nothing now but stress. This was supposed to be fun. All these issues open. You're gonna be up all night.
Where we have a song with one set of words going with a video that I dug out of a Dropbox folder from 3 years ago with a completely different set of words. So if you want to see that done properly, come to the DevRocks party tomorrow night. Let's play a different piece of opening music that has nothing to do with open source, but is kind of fun. Hello, Devox. There is a cycle that I think most of the people in this room can probably relate to. And it's something I call the nerd stages of shiny. Because the first thing that happens is you discover that there is something new and shiny in the world. And maybe it's a phone, or maybe it's a headset, or it's an algorithm, or it's a piece of software, or it's a plugin, or it's a something. And 15 seconds ago, you did not know this thing existed. And you were fine, and you were happy. But now you know about it, you are sad. Because it exists and you don't have one and it isn't yours. And so you're like, I need to get one of these. I need to get one of these. I won't be happy until I have one of these. And so you download it or you order it or you click the install or you jump through the sales hoops. You do whatever you have to do and you get hold of it and you unbox it and you set it up and you install it. And it's so exciting because it's going to solve all your problems. This is it. You promise yourself this is the last one you're ever going to get. This one's going to get it right. And then you have that moment. That first little seedling of doubt, where you're like, hang on a second, I bought this amazing smartwatch because they said it could play MP3s without having to connect to my phone, but I can't see a way to upload MP3s. The only thing I can see is something called Get a Deezer subscription, whatever that is. The salesperson said we could deploy workflows directly from GitHub, but I can't see any way to connect to GitHub. All I see is a little upload button, and it wants me to give them an XML file. And you start thinking, well, maybe I can tweak it. Maybe I just need to tweak it a little bit, change some settings, add a plugin, tweak this, fiddle with that, change that around. Now, all of you folks out there who have your workstation, your IDE set up exactly the way you like it with your font and your color scheme and your line spacing and everything, you know what I'm talking about. Like, that's your happy place. If there's something you don't like, you can go in and you can change it until it works the way that you want it to work. And to this kind of nerd hacker developer, the worst thing you can possibly do is say no. Can't do that. You're not allowed, because we said it's technically possible. All of the bits and pieces and technology and hardware and software exist, but you can't. Because, that's part of our enterprise premium plan. Would you like to upgrade? Oh, no, your license doesn't allow you to. Oh, no, we would let you do that, but we're not going to because we're just not. In 1980, Xerox donated a laser printer to the Artificial Intelligence Research Laboratory at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, in 1980, MIT was about 2 years away from artificial general intelligence. Same way that they've been since 1954 and today, and still will be 20 years from now. Now, the Xerox could have been a massive contender in the history. In fact, both of these organizations, MIT produced the software that took human beings to the moon. They invented Ethernet. They invented spreadsheets. They invented functional programming and passwords and all kinds of astonishing things. And maybe blockchain and possibly the Roomba. And Xerox could have been a major contender, but they were so frightened of doing anything that would jeopardize their photocopying business that today Xerox is just a verb for photocopying stuff. Now, the laser printer was basically a photocopier with a network card and a control unit attached to it. And it had a problem. It had the same problem. You folks do remember what photocopiers are, right? Just checking? Okay, good. I see nodding heads. It had the same problem that photocopiers have. It jams. Now, if you are making copies, and the copier jams, that's fine. You're stood there, you're making your copies. And so, and like you open the thing and you pull the piece of paper out like you're getting the dog to let go of the frisbee, and then you close the door and you press go and it keeps going, and everyone's happy. But a network printer You don't stand in front of that. It's over the other side of the building. You send your print job. And then when you go to get a cup of coffee, you think, oh, I'll pick up my printer, and you discover that it's jammed. Discover it's not just your job it's jammed on, it's been jammed all morning. Your job is job number 10 in a queue that hasn't moved for 3 hours. So you unjam it, and you start it going, and you go and sit down, and next time you go and get a coffee, you discover that it's jammed again. And one of the people who was working at MIT's AI lab in the early 1980s was this gentleman, Richard Stallman. I'm sure you have opinions about Stallman. You can tell them to each other afterwards in the pub. I don't care. But I don't think you can discuss the history of free and open software without acknowledging the role Stallman played in it. Because he had an idea. He's like, this thing, it knows when it's got a paper jam because there's a little light that lights up. And it's got a network card. So why don't we just modify it so if the paper jams, it broadcasts a message across the network and whoever's closest can come and unjam it. So he went to Xerox and he said, hey, I need the control software for the laser printer you gave us. And Xerox said no. There's one account says the Xerox representative he spoke to said, I have been explicitly told not to give Richard Stallman the software for the laser printer. Now, there are two versions of this story. One version is that this incident, Stallman realized that they had this wonderful piece of hardware that they weren't going to be able to utilize to its full potential because of policies around copyright and access to code, and that he was going to commit his life to the cause of free and open software. There's another version that says that it pissed him off so much that he is still butthurt about it 40 years later. I think both versions are kind of true. But he's spoken several times about this incident with the Xerox laser printer as being what sort of started his commitment to the idea of free software. And before we go any further, let's just figure out what do we mean by this word free, right? Because you often hear people go, oh, well, there's free as in free speech, and there's free as in free beer. So let's talk about free beer. Free beer is lovely. Like, hey, a nice hot day and you're thirsty, and here you go, here's a beer, and it didn't cost you any money. Anyone fancy a free beer? Sounds pretty good, right? So now you've got a beer. Well, what can you do with it? Can you sell it? Not allowed. You need a license from the government to be able to sell beer. You could drink it, but maybe you can't drink it. Maybe you're driving. Maybe for health reasons. Maybe you're not old enough. Maybe you have some kind of, cultural or religious reason for not wanting to drink the beer. Well, that's okay. Maybe you can keep it until you do feel like drinking it. But you haven't left a pint just sitting out for more than like half. It doesn't keep. So we've given you this free thing, but we haven't actually given you any freedom at all. You can't enjoy it, you can't sell it, you can't keep it. You are incredibly restricted in the freedom that free beer actually gives you. Now, there is a lot of software out there in the world which operates on free as in free beer, as in it doesn't cost any money. But we do pay for it. We pay for it with our attention. We pay for it with our data. We pay for it with interactions and all kinds of things that the companies behind platforms like Instagram and Facebook and Google can analyze and turn into massive data archives and they can sell. And there's also the software that we pay for. There's software that we buy, and some of us spend a ridiculous amount of money on software. So let me ask you a question. We've been spending all this money on software for the last however many decades. Do any of you own second-hand software? There's maybe a handful of people who have trawled through eBay because you want like a original Windows 95 still in the box. But the idea of second-hand software just kind of doesn't compute. We spend all this money on this stuff which is valuable, but then when you're finished with it, the idea of selling it sort of doesn't even add up as part of the way we think about value in code anymore. Now, when I was a kid, there was, and I believe actually still is, there is one particular kind of software which has a booming market in aftermarket and secondhand and used and swaps and those kinds of things, and that's console games. And the reason is that most consumer games consoles, certainly back in the 90s when I sort of first got into this scene, there was no way of the software, the code, and the plastic package that it came in were so tightly coupled, it didn't make sense to think of the one without the other. Even if you could copy Sonic Hedgehog onto a floppy disk, you couldn't find a Mega Drive with a disk drive. It didn't work. That's not how any of this worked. And so we could effectively treat this copy of Sonic Hedgehog as an artifact that you could take home, you could play it till you were finished, you could give it to your friends, you could sell it. Now, there were two kinds of kids at my school. I grew up spent my teenage years in Bristol in the west of England. And there were two kinds of kids in my school. There were the console kids and the computer kids. And the console kids had skateboards, and they shaved their heads, and they were always in trouble for lighting stuff on fire. And the computer kids had long hair and mountain bikes, and we also set stuff on fire, but we didn't get caught. And if the computer kids wanted to play the latest shiny game, we had a choice. We could buy it. We could go to a store and we could buy X-Wing or Eye of the Beholder or The Secret of Monkey Island. Now, these games retailed for between 20 and 40 pounds in the 1990s. That was my monthly allowance. If I wanted to, I could buy Monkey Island, and that would be it until next month. That was all the money that I had for a month. Or I could buy Big Macs, or I could buy jeans, or I could buy bits for my bike, all these kind of things. Massive investment for somebody at that particular point in my life. Or we could copy them. It even came with a little card saying, dial a pirate. Now, nominally, this was a copy protection device, because you couldn't play Monkey Island unless you had the little cardboard disc that you would rotate to the right value at that point in the game to get through the next level. There is no copy protection mechanism in existence that will defeat bored teenagers with no money, because we had nothing better to do than figure out how to copy the games. They made the discs uncopyable. We figured out how to copy the uncopyable discs. They included dial-a-pirate decoder rings. We worked out how to draw our own dial-a-pirate decoder rings. But there was another kind of software, and that was in the back of the computer magazines. There were classified advertisements for companies that sold free software. And free here covered a whole wealth of different licenses. Some of it was what's called public domain. Software that literally the person who wrote it went, I don't care, just do whatever you want. You want to pretend you wrote it? Go ahead. Doesn't bother me in the slightest. Some people even took their name off it. There was public domain software that we didn't even know where it came from, let alone whether we had to buy a license for it or not. Some of it was shareware, software that you would give to your friends, and if you liked it or they liked it, the idea was that you'd send them a check and register it like a good citizen. Or some of them didn't want a check. Some of them wanted a postcard. Yeah, this is free. I made it for fun. Use it. It's a word processor. It's a CAD program. It's a game. If you like it, send me a postcard just so I know who's using my software out there. There was one wonderful piece of shareware I had was a thing called the Ford Simulator. The Ford Motor Company thought that making a 4-color CGA game that ran on the IBM PC that let you drive all their different Fords would be a great way of selling cars. It was not. I don't think anyone ever went and bought a car based on playing Ford Simulator. But there was another model, which was the model popularized by this guy. This is Scott Miller, who founded a company called Apogee Software. He was writing games for the IBM PC in the late 80s, early 90s, and he wrote a game called Kingdom of Kroz, which was too big to fit on a floppy disk. And so he had a brainwave. He was going to split the game into 3 parts, and part 1 he would give away for free. Anyone who wanted to copy it, swap it with your friends, download it from a bulletin board system. And when you got to the end of part 1, a screen would come up saying, hey, did you enjoy that? You want to play part 2 and 3? Send a check, and then there was the address of his parents' house in Texas. Kingdom of Kroz made something like $100,000 in 3 months, and Scott Miller quit his job, went to make games full-time, published them all as shareware with this model. Part 1 is free, and if you want to, you can send us a check and you get part 2 and part 3. And while he's in the middle of all this, he gets hold of a game called Dangerous Dave, written by a guy called John Romero, who was working at a company called Softdisk out of Louisiana. And this was the kind of, Super Mario Nintendo-style scrolling game, but it was on the PC, which meant it was much easier to copy and distribute because you didn't have to make cartridges. So he looked up the people who created this and tracked down these 3 gentlemen, John Carmack, John Romero, and a guy called Tom Hall. Now, they had, about the time he got in touch with them, they had ported Super Mario to the IBM PC, which everybody believed was impossible. They said you couldn't run Mario on a PC, the graphics weren't good enough. John Carmack said, challenge accepted, rolled his sleeves up, ate a lot of pizza, cranked out a Super Mario clone for the PC, sent it to Nintendo. And Nintendo said, this is very impressive work, boys, bury it. Bury it so deep that no one ever sees it ever again. Nintendo did not want kids copying Mario in the schoolyard for obvious reasons. They wanted to sell cartridges and make money. So Scott Miller gets in touch and goes, that's really impressive technology. Clearly you're not going to get the Mario character license. Why don't you come up with a completely different game about a bouncing protagonist who jumps all over platforms and has to rescue someone from somewhere? And they came out with Commander Keen, Invasion of the Vorticons, where you're not a plumber, you're a school kid with a football helmet and a pogo stick, and you've got to go to Mars and rescue your babysitter from the aliens who have kidnapped her. Now, this game made sufficient money. It made about $250,000 in its first year. They quit their jobs at Softdisk. They founded Ideas from the Deep, which became ID, which became id Software, and released a series of games which would revolutionize home computer and PC gaming. Wolfenstein 3D was the first game where you could kind of turn, instead of just turning 90 degrees around corners, you had 360 degrees of freedom. Doom invented network multiplayer deathmatch and crashed every college network in America till they figured out where all the traffic was coming from. And Quake was, it wasn't the first fully 3D immersive first-person shooter. I believe Descent 2 got there first because someone picked me up on that. But it was one of the first games to take advantage of 3D accelerator cards, and it sort of pioneered the 3D interactive immersive environments that would define the next generation of gaming. But these three games also represented milestones in the distribution of software. I got Wolfenstein 3D on a disc on the cover of PC Format magazine. I got Doom copied from a friend of mine, and I downloaded Quake from the id Software website. It's about 1997, and this was that tiny little bit in history where you could download things from the web in 1.44 megabyte zip files, so you could copy them onto floppy disks to take home, because you maybe had the internet at college, but you didn't have it in your house yet. It's a weird little period. Now, this is 1997. This is the point where people are starting to get the internet at home. Kids are going to college, they're getting the web, they're getting email. Businesses are rolling out the World Wide Web to their employees. And in the process, we encountered a community of people who had been online a lot longer than any of us had, who had their own ideas about what free software was, that didn't have anything to do with coming free on a disc on the cover of a magazine. To them, freedom was about the four essential freedoms of software. Freedom 1, the freedom to study how the program works and modify it to do what you want. Freedom 2 is the freedom to distribute copies, and freedom 3 is the freedom to share your modifications. And later, somebody went, we actually forgot to put in the one where you're allowed to run the software, and so they retrofitted freedom 0, the freedom to run the program however you want for any purpose. These four freedoms were the founding principles of something called the GNU project, set up by Richard Stallman in the early 1980s with the aim of creating a completely free as in free speech, free as in unrestricted computer operating system. By the early 1990s, the GNU project had most of an operating system. They had a compiler, they had an editor, they had a linker, they had tools like awk and sed and grep, they had a file system. What they didn't have was an operating system kernel. This is a bit like, yeah, I've almost invented a car. I've got a stereo, I've got mirrors, I've got the heated seats. The engine, yeah, I'm still having a bit of trouble with that. But perhaps more significantly, along the way, they had sat down with a bunch of lawyers and they had drafted a thing called the GNU General Public License, which was an openly accessible and reproducible document that tried to codify those four essential freedoms in something that could stand up in a court of law. Now, 1991, Linus Torvalds, who was an undergraduate student at the University of Helsinki, creates an operating system kernel, and he posts this lovely thing to Usenet. I'm doing a free operating system. It's just a hobby. It won't be big and professional like GNU for 386 and 486 AT clones, and basically puts this kernel out there, and people realize if they take Linus's kernel and they mash it up with the rest of the GNU operating system software, they've got a free operating system. December that year, he published the Linux kernel under the GNU General Public License, and so by the start of 1992, we, for the first time in history, we had a complete consumer-grade operating system for desktop computers, which was not it wasn't under copyright restrictions. We'll talk more about copyright in a second, but it was free. You could use it, you could build it, you could modify it, you could adapt it, you could do anything you like with it, and nobody was going to expect you to pay them money for the privilege of doing that. Now, this is probably a good time to ask why. And also, you'll notice we've been going about 20 minutes in the talk now, and the phrase open source hasn't come up in the timeline yet. Now, when it comes to why did Linus Torvalds invent a kernel and put it on Usenet? I think he did it for fun, and he wanted everyone to see the cool thing that he did. And id Software, John Carmack, John Romero, I think they wrote games because they wanted to play games. And they wanted to be able to play each other at the games in their own heads, and the best way to do that was to write them, and all they really wanted to do was play games and write games and play games and write games, and most of those guys still write code every day. They don't have to. John Romero got so rich off the back of id Software that he bought a Ferrari and then gave it away in a deathmatch contest, and the next day he went back to work writing games. I think they do it because they love it. But I think for the GNU project, to them, giving software away was kind of putting their not their money, but their principles where their mouth is, saying, we actually think we are going to execute our ideology. These are the principles we live by, and we are actually going to ship software on this basis. Now, the 1990s, late 90s, around the time that Quake is coming out, this was a pivotal time for software in all sorts of ways because the World Wide Web was taking off. Now, I am of the generation, I used to have business cards with Webmaster written on them. And in the 90s, companies that had websites, it wasn't like they didn't have any IT. They had IT. They had Novell NetWare and Lotus Notes and all sorts of horrors. And they would give somebody, you're the webmaster, go, no, you can't connect to our network. You can't use any of our equipment. The web is a fad. Go in the corner and don't make a fuss. And so folks like me were looking around for ways to run websites with no money on scavenged hardware. Now, Microsoft, they had the personal web server with Windows 95. Has anyone ever run this? Oh, it's terrible. Very, very bad indeed. And so we were looking around and we discovered that Linux and the GNU tools or the GNU Linux combination operating system, this was a industrial strength server grade networked operating system with web servers and databases and all these kinds of things. If you knew how to make it work, if you knew how to put all the pieces together. And then as the World Wide Web kind of gained traction, companies realize it's not just some fad that's going to go away overnight. They start going, well, actually, it'd be kind of nice if we had some support other than like a teenager in the corner who knows how our website works. And companies like Red Hat saw an opportunity. All of this code, they could take it, they could bundle it, they could create what's called a distribution. Find a whole bunch of tools that they would verify would work harmoniously together, offer support, put them in a nice shiny box, and they could sell the free software for money. Which inevitably resulted in you going to your boss and saying, I need money for free software. And the boss going, sorry, what? And you're like, I want to buy Red Hat Linux version, I want to buy support for this. They're like, well, it's free, why do you need money for it? And this was the crux of the problem. This is Christine Peterson. She founded a thing called the Foresight Institute in San Francisco, and she was one of the kind of primary movers in the very origins of the open source movement. And as she put it, those new to the term free software assume it is referring to the price. Old-timers must then launch into an explanation, usually given as follows. We mean free as in freedom, not free as in beer. At this point, the discussion on software has turned into one about the price of an alcoholic beverage. And she's absolutely spot on. She says, between meetings that week, I was focused on the need for a better name and came up with the term open source software. The way that she popularized it, I actually thought was really clever. She didn't suggest it, she just started using it in meetings and seeing when some of the tech bros around the table started calling it that as well. And when they did, she's like, right, if they're using it, it's going to catch on. And it did catch on. The opensource.org website was set up a couple of weeks later by Eric Raymond and Bruce Perens. Tim O'Reilly was running a big free software summit that quickly became the first open source summit. And we had a new way of referring to software that wasn't so much about how much money you paid for it. It was about having access to the code. It was about having the freedom to modify it and adapt it and make it do what you wanted. And the mechanism that they used to do that is actually really interesting. This is an excerpt from the GNU General Public License version 1, which includes this clause here. You may not impose any further restrictions on the recipient's exercise of the rights granted herein, which is legal speak for you can't take this and then close it down. Once we've given it to you, you've got to pay it forward. You've got to give it to the rest of the world. And the mechanism that they use to enforce this is copyright. And copyright might sound slightly counterintuitive, but copyright fundamentally says if you create something, you control what happens to your work. Normally, copyright is used to prevent other people from selling your books, selling your movies, selling your music, those kinds of things. But copyright can also be used to say, I'm going to give this away for free, and you have to keep it free if you are going to make use of it. That's the license under which I make it available to you. Now, this is all completely hypothetical until at some point in the early 2000s, this thing comes along. This is the Linksys WRT54G wireless broadband router. Basically, it's a little tiny computer with about 0.5 meg of memory and 4 network ports, and it ran GNU Linux. And there's a guy called Andrew Miklas who downloaded a firmware update for this thing, unzipped it, pulled it apart, and he's like, I recognize this. There's a Linux kernel in here. There are GNU networking tools. Where's the source code? And the reason they wanted the source code, this thing had Broadcom wireless chips in it. Now, if any of you folks was around trying to get Wi-Fi working on Linux in the early 2000s, yeah, it sucked. It was horrible. The people who made Wi-Fi chips did not care about Lunix. And so you were constantly trying to find which laptop support can I get, does this work? And they worked out this thing had Broadcom wireless chips in it. This was kind of, industry standard chip. If they could get the source code, they could open source the drivers, they could use that to reverse engineer it and get support for that. Now, there is a little bit of a gap in the timeline here, because this starts, Andrew Wicklass and a bunch of other people start petitioning Linksys. You've violated the GPL, you need to publish your source code. In 2003, Linksys releases GPL code for the WRT54G. This page is still up. This is still on Slashdot from the original release. Linksys has caved to community pressure and released the source. And 5 years later, the Free Software Foundation, which is kind of the legal arm of the GNU project, they sue Linksys. Well, actually, they sue Cisco, because by this point, Cisco's bought Linksys. And at some point, somebody must have gone to like the Cisco chief legal boss and gone, boss, I think we might have accidentally bought a lawsuit. And it turns, so Cisco bought Linksys. Linksys had outsourced the driver development to Broadcom. Broadcom had outsourced it to somebody who wasn't named in the court proceedings. But at some point, somebody just copied Linux and the GNU tools into this thing, shipped it, and went, yeah, that'll be fine. Now, I don't know what happened in the intervening 5 years. I'm guessing what happened is Linksys were like, there you go, have the source code. And the Free Software Foundation are like, no, this is good. They've started to cave. Because what the FSF wants is they want a legally binding verdict. They want to get this in front of a judge in a court and have a judge say, yes, the GNU General Public License is legally binding, because that precedent has never actually been established. This goes backwards and forwards. Eventually, Cisco settle out of court, because Cisco don't want to go in front of a judge because they might lose. And they agree that they will always publish open firmware releases, source code's available, they make a donation, they appoint a compliance officer, but it didn't get to court. It's the closest, certainly in North America, that the GPL has ever come to actually getting a judge to deliver a legal verdict on it. It has happened in Europe. There's a guy called Harold Velter, who contributed some networking code to the Linux kernel, which makes him one of the authors of Linux, which means he owns the copyright on all of that code, which means that anybody who uses his code in violation of that license, technically he can sue them, and he did. He took a company called D-Link. They had a network-attached storage device with some of his networking code in it. He took them to court in Germany, got as far as the Frankfurt District Court, who said, yes, the GPL is legally binding under German law. Unfortunately, I believe German law is not based on legal precedent the way it is in some other countries, so they said, this time, right here, right now, it's legally binding. Next time could be something different. But this is a pretty good indication that the people who drafted the GPL had done their homework and kind of covered all of the bases. Now, this is all going on the late 1990s, kind of 98, 99, turn of the millennium, and there is a very, very famous quote from Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft at this point in history. Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. That is the way the license works. Now, it's not, that's not how the license works, it's not how intellectual property works, and it's not how cancer works, but apart from that, he's onto something. Now, this was like a one-off quote in a radio interview at a trade show in Ohio or something that went viral before we had the phrase going viral. Microsoft was terrified of Linux and the GNU project and open source because Microsoft owned the desktop to the tune of billions and billions of dollars of revenue. And the idea that companies could do computing without having to buy Microsoft Windows was an existential threat to the existence of the Microsoft Corporation. Now, I realize that, so I'm not kind of a Java developer. I've done bits of it. I'm from the .NET camp. Microsoft is the ecosystem that I have been in the front lines of for my entire development career. And I have watched from the front row as Microsoft went from Linux is a cancer to we love Linux, run Linux on Microsoft Azure. Do you want this? Microsoft is one of the biggest contributors to parts of the GNU Linux operating system now. And the reason for that dramatic about face is the cloud. Because the cloud has changed the way that you can make money out of software. One of the things that I used to do when I had business cards with Webmaster written on them is I used to build servers. And it took about, you could maybe get it done in a week if, Dell had the right thing in stock and the shipping was good and everything. Normally it would be 3 or 4 weeks to get one of these boxes, and then you'd have to find somebody to help you carry it up the stairs. You'd plug it into the rack, you'd wire in the network, you'd boot the thing up the first time, and then you'd be like, right, what are we putting on here? Right, we're going to put Red Hat on this, and they want PHP and MySQL and Apache and all the other bits. It would take me about a day to set up a server. Now, I would charge clients, maybe $1,000 to set it up and a couple of $100 a month to babysit it. Not me personally, but my company. In theory, if we got 50 people phone us in the morning going, hey, we all need web servers today, well, hey, £50,000 payday. In practice, there's no way we could build 50 servers in a day because that's impossible. Cloud has changed all that. Cloud is infrastructure on demand. Don't worry about building servers. Don't even worry about building racks. Just build shipping containers and deploy them and put compute in the shipping containers. And yeah, you want the software? Have as much free software as you want. Oh yeah, but you have to pay us every time you run it. And that's where things get really interesting. And this is where I want to tell you the story of Sammy the squirrel. Sammy lives in the forest with all the other woodland animals, and every Sunday, all of the animals, they come down to the clearing in the forest where there's the old tree stump, and they do woodland show and tell. And they all show off their craft projects, and they bring bake sale recipes and talk about all the things they've been working on. And Sammy loves to make computer games. And Sammy has just finished Acorn Adventure, which is a little run-and-jump platform game where you play a little squirrel who runs through the woods and jumps up and down on trees and tries to gather enough acorns for the winter without getting caught by the owl. Now, Sammy comes along, he shows everyone Acorn Adventure, and then the next week, when he comes back to Woodland Show and Tell, he's given everyone copies. He's like, hey, take this home, play it, share it with your friends. I'd love to see everyone playing my game. Next week, Jeff the raccoon shows up to Woodland Show and Tell, and he's got an arcade cabinet with a coin slot and everything, and it's running Acorn Adventure. And all the animals are queuing up, and they're putting quarters into this thing, and they're playing games of Acorn Adventure, and the little animals are pestering their parents for more money because they want to have another go on it, and Sammy is thrilled. Like, this is amazing. Look, Sammy's game is running on an actual arcade machine. This is so cool. Next week, Jeff the raccoon turns up in a brand new pickup truck with 2 arcade machines. Now, by this point, the novelty is starting to wear off a little bit, and some of the animals are complaining the game is too hard, and the owl moves too fast, and there's a bit at the end of level 2 where the music isn't quite finished, and Sammy says, no, it's fine. You can fix it. Look, you've got the code. The game is free software. You can modify. But of course, they don't think of it like that because they're paying money to play it. They're putting quarters in, they're paying customers, they have their rights. They are getting very, very upset at the level of quality that there is in Acorn Adventure. Next week, Jeff turns up in a solid gold helicopter. But that's all right, because Sammy's been hard at work, and Sammy has produced Acorn Adventure 2, the sequel. More levels, better graphics, the music is finished, the owl moves a little bit more slowly, and it's still free. It's free to give to your friends, it's free to pass around the schoolyard, it's free to take it home and modify it, but, if you want to put it in your pay-to-play arcade cabinet machine, you are going to have to give Sammy $1, because Sammy has not quite gathered enough acorns for the winter, because Sammy's been very busy programming, and Sammy would quite like to be able to feed their family. The woodland animals, oh, they don't like that. Sammy's a traitor. Sammy has done an open source rug pull. Sammy has betrayed the causes and principles of free software. And of course, Sammy said, how did this happen? What's going on? I put all this hard work in and I gave it away for free. And then I saw someone was making loads of money out of it. And all I said was, if you want to make loads of money out of it, I want a little bit. And suddenly Sammy is the enemy. Sammy is the bad guy in this, and everyone hates them. Or maybe that's not what happens. Maybe when the animals start complaining about the difficulty in the music and everything, Wilbur pops up. Wilbur says, hello, friend. Looks like you're having a little bit of trouble with your game there. Well, I can help you out. And Wilbur contributes, a sprite here, a little bit of music there, adds in a couple of new levels. Soon Wilbur has commit access to the Acorn Adventure repository. And one of the most requested features is being able to play the game with a credit card, so you don't have to keep going to the bank to get a bag of quarters. And so Wilbur adds credit card payment to Acorn Adventure, and then somebody notices that every time you swipe your MasterCard in the machine, it's sending a copy of your credit card number to a server in, is that Belarus? We're not quite sure. And of course, at this point, Wilbur's disappeared. And come to think of it, so have most of the angry animals that engineered the pressure that got Wilbur commit access in the first place. We live in a world where trillion-dollar companies got there by selling free software, just like Jeff the Raccoon selling Sammy's Acorn Adventure. Companies like Amazon, we're literally talking trillion-dollar market caps for hosting cloud services, and an awful lot of the services they host are built on top of free and open software. Now, there were certain elements in the Free Software Foundation that saw this coming a long, long time ago. The late 90s, early 2000s, they drafted a thing called the Affero GPL, the AGPL, which is like the ultra mega bulletproof GNU general public license. Because the general public license says, look, if you are distributing software, you have to distribute source code. If I give you a copy of the game, I've got to give you the source or tell you where you can download it. But if all you are doing is interacting with the software across a network, that does not constitute distribution. I can host it in my data center and you can point a browser or a mobile app at it. I'm not distributing the software. You're just interacting with it. The software doesn't go anywhere. The Affero GPL says, yes, it does. It says if you're interacting across a network, that constitutes distribution, and anybody who interacts with it is entitled to the complete source code to everything. Now, there's not a whole lot of software out there which is published under the Affero GPL, but there is a fair bit of it, and a lot of it is up on sites like GitHub. And the interesting question, which is probably going to make a lot of lawyers very rich, let's say somebody is coding away and they're using Cursor, or they're using Copilot, they're using some kind of machine learning language model, AI assistant, to solve a problem that they have at their job. And it happens to pull in some lines of code which are identical to some lines that were published under the Affero GPL. And they review it, and they test it, and it goes through the deployment process, and it goes live on TikTok.com, or Netflix, or World of Warcraft, or somewhere else where that software is being interacted with across a network by an awful lot of people for an awful lot of money. At that point, technically, they are in violation of the Affero GPL, unless everyone who ever accesses TikTok can download the entire source code to TikTok. Do you think this is going to happen? Not a chance in hell, because TikTok has bigger lawyers than the people who give away the free software. But legally, you join the pieces together, that's the scenario that we end up with. Now, the Affero, the AGPL, is not one of the most popular licenses. The vast majority of what we think of as free and open software is published under one of the so-called permissive licenses, the Apache license, the Berkeley Systems Distribution, or the MIT license. Now, I like these licenses because they're short. This is the MIT license. This is all of it. This is the full legal boilerplate, and it basically says, we own this. Do anything you like. You can't remove the license, and you can't sue us if the software doesn't work. Now, a lot of the stuff which has been happening recently with free and open source software, there have been some very, very high-profile cases of companies trying to retrospectively change, or to change the license of code from the next version of what they're doing. Now, a lot of open source projects, if any of you have ever contributed code to React, for example, you'll have signed Meta's contributor license agreement, which is the thing that says, yeah, it's free software, but I'm giving my free software to you legally, so now the free software is your free software, and you are free to do free stuff with it. There are similar license agreements for Apache projects. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation has one. Microsoft has one. And this raises the question of why would people contribute to open source if the first thing they have to do is to sign away their ownership of the work they just did? Well, in some cases, that's their job. There are people on payroll at Amazon, at Microsoft, at probably some folks in this room, certainly folks who are here at DevOps this week, whose job is to write free software and give it away for nothing, which is wonderful work if you can get it. And it was a lot easier to get 5 years ago, and there's not so much free money sloshing around now. Some people are like, actually, I don't care. Yeah, I'm going to write the software, I'm going to put it out, I'm going to have fun with it, the end. And for certain projects, it does stay fun. But for an awful lot of the software that is out there, what happens is Sammy Squirrel does the hard work and puts it out in the world, and it becomes vital components of essential systems. And Sammy's like, actually, I'm not entirely comfortable with trillion-dollar companies selling my stuff and me not having enough acorns for the winter. Now, I'm going to talk about Redis. I wasn't going to talk about Redis because generally you don't badmouth the sponsors of the conference you're at. But it's all right because Redis just did another thing and now everyone loves them again. About this time last year, Redis announced that the next version of their key value stuff. Redis is fantastic software, and it has historically always been free, and this time last year they said it's not going to be free anymore. It's going to be mostly free. Like if you want to run it at home or you want to run it in your own company as part of your business applications, that's cool. But if all you're doing is selling hosted Redis out of a data center, it's not free for you anymore. And this caused a huge amount of drama, and a bunch of people were like, oh, we can't have this, that won't do. People forked it. There's a project now called Valkey, which is protocol compatible with Redis. Microsoft spun off their own version, thing called Garnet. But just recently, like literally last week, Redis has announced that the next version, they're going to release under an AGPL license, which I actually think is kind of nice, because this is the license we just talked about, the one that says, well, if you interact with it across a network, you've got to publish it. So if Amazon, to pick a completely random example run by a raccoon called Jeff, if they want to run Redis in AWS Amazon Web Services, then yeah, they're absolutely free to do that without buying a license, as long as they publish the source code for Amazon Web Services. Yeah, I don't think they're going to do that. Now, the other big high-profile example that kicked off last year was, have you been following the WordPress drama? So last year, WordPress, there's a company called WP Engine who offer hosted WordPress, and they kind of got into this massive legal battle with, so WordPress is incredibly complicated. It is GPL software, so WordPress itself is published under the GNU General Public License. It's created by a guy called Matt Mullenweg, who is both the kind of chief custodian of the charity that administers the WordPress trademark, but he's also the chief executive of Automatic, which is the commercial entity. Basically, there's about 20 different ways that Matt would be legally required to sue himself if he did any of the things that I think he's trying to do, but he can't do because the GPL won't let him do them. And at one point, he had this kind of bit of a meltdown soundbite. He said, WP Engine is free to offer their hacked up, bastardized simulacra of WordPress's GPL code to their customers, and they can experience WordPress as WP Engine envisions it, with them getting all the profit and providing all the service. Yes, this is exactly right. That's what the GPL says. You get all the profit, you provide all the services, you keep all the money. That's what the freedom enshrined in those 4 basic freedoms does. And yeah, I think Matt Mullenweg was looking at these other companies changing their licenses and going, I wish I could do that, but I can't because it's GPL, and now I'm just going to get really angry and throw all my toys out of the pram. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with these kind of projects because this is all relatively recent. And certainly in the .NET space, there's been another couple of high-profile examples within the last year or so. But there is an interesting case study we can refer to. There's a project called Service Stack, which is it's a .NET library for building high-performance message-based APIs. And Service Stack changed their license in 2014. So about 11 years ago, they switched from a permissive license to a use this for free unless you're at a company that makes money. And if it does, you're going to have to pay us, and I think it was about $8,000 per developer per year. Now, I remember this because we had to stop using Service Stack on my team because, yeah, we made a bunch of money, but we didn't make it out of APIs. And so technically, we were using it for profit. I went to my boss. I was like, can we have money for this? He said, what's an API? I'm like, all right, I'm not going to win this particular argument. But I got to know Demis when I was working with it, Demis Bellot, who's the founder of Service Stack, the creator of it. And I emailed him last year, and I was like, look, I'm putting together this talk about sustainability and open source, and how's it going? And I got this lovely email back from him. He said, I've been able to work full-time on it since he left Stack Exchange. That's the job that he quit a decade ago to go and work on Service Stack. It's improved. It's much more capable than what was possible as an open source side project. I was willing to take a pay cut, so I was pleasantly surprised when it ended up making more money than any job I'd had prior. Service Stack has allowed our family to be financially independent and given me the freedom to work on whichever features I want. Now, financial independence and a freedom to work on whatever you want, hands up, that sounds like a pretty good way to write. Yeah, I can get behind that. Now, when Service Stack did the thing, Service Stack's going from strength to strength. It's doing great. They just shipped version 8. When they changed their license, what happened is the community went, no, we are going to take the last free version that got published, and we are going to fork that, and we are going to produce NService Kit, which is free. And it was for about a year, and then it died. It withered on the vine. They're like, oh, we can't maintain this. It's too much effort. If you fork software which has gone through a license change and you spin that around, you're like, we're going to do the free thing because they don't want to. What's going to happen is all of the good, responsible paying customers are going to go with them, and all of the freeloaders are going to come to you. And within a year, you are going to have all of their angry requests and all of their support and all of their nasty emails and all of their accusations about not merging things fast enough. And you are going to find yourself under an incredible amount of pressure to potentially bring in outside help on the maintenance of your applications. Now, how are we doing? We got 4 minutes to talk about XZUtils. Now, XZUtils is part of the authentication system that's used to log into Linux and Unix systems remotely. It is mostly maintained by one person. This is the contributor dashboard. Lasse Colin, Laju here, has got 1,945 commits going back to 2008. GRT75, somebody called Giatan, we don't really know. This person managed to get commit access to it by jumping in at a point where that project was under a lot of pressure and being helpful and being accommodating. The third most prolific contributor to it did this. One little spike. And the fourth most prolific contributor to a vital part of the authentication that secures most of the servers on the planet is someone called Adrian N., who made 11 commits to it back in 2014. Now, you look at the timeline on the commits here. Like I said, this is the exact point where a lot of pressure gets piled on Lasse to start merging PRs faster and improving stuff. What happened is Giatan social engineered this to the point where they had commit access to the repos and the deployment pipeline and came within probably a couple of days of getting a backdoor into all of those systems, into the package management and distribution networks for all those kind of things. And the only reason we found this by luck. We found this because Andreas Freund, who's a researcher working at Microsoft, was benchmarking some stuff and was looking at all the CPU usage metrics and noticed that the authentication daemon process was just spinning a little hotter than it should, and went digging and went, this is really bad. Now, the technical attack is incredibly sophisticated. It's things like publishing binaries which don't exactly match the source code that's available in the repo, but it was social engineering that kind of brought us to the brink of this thing in the first place. Now, I absolutely believe that all of you folks out there would produce good, quality, secure, fast performance software if time was money, time was no object, and money was no object, and you could spend as long as you wanted working on it. And I want to wrap up just by talking about one tiny little detail here. We don't own music anymore. We have Spotify, we have streaming. You can't buy music, you just listen to whatever you like and you pay for the privilege. And convenience trumps ownership for the vast majority of people. And that's how the cloud works. Now, how many of you folks have ever tried to get your company to sponsor open source? It's not easy. I want to pay money for free software. That conversation didn't work in the 90s, and it doesn't work now. But how many of you get an invoice from AWS or Google Cloud or Azure with like a 5-digit number at the end of every month? Would you notice another 20, 50, 100, 500 put on top of that number? The way to get money out of corporations to support open source is to hit them while their wallets are already open on invoices they're already paying. Now, I just want to spell out, I want to close out today with one potential model for how this might work. I'm going to use NuGet, which is the .NET package management ecosystem. One, I'm familiar with it. Two, they publish very good stats on how many packages, how many downloads, all those kinds of things. Now, what I did for this, all the research and calculations, I'll share those with you. They're online. You can have them at the end. But what I did is I crunched the numbers, worked out how many downloads NuGet gets across a 6-week period. So that's about this. It's about 40,000 million downloads, so 40 American billion downloads every month or so. That's what I put on Hacker News when they say nobody uses .NET anymore. I did some kind of back-of-the-envelope calculation, 2.4 million active users. So let's come up with a paid package management distribution model. So we're going to say, all right, let's say half the people who use it are free. And we got the $15 a month, the Spotify plan, and the $75 a month indie plan and an enterprise plan. That one sits up here. This gives us $43 million per month to distribute to the people who make the software. Now, that works out at $0.001 per download. That is insultingly small. Even compared to Spotify, that is insultingly small, and Spotify is terrible. It is also orders of magnitude better than anything we've managed to come up with in terms of financially sustainable open source. The most popular packages in that ecosystem, they're bringing in about $13,000 a month based on those numbers. That's enough to hire someone to fix the bugs and do the support and look after the forums, bring in some engineers. Something like ImageSharp, image processing library, yeah, $3,000 a month. Some parts of the world, that's quit your job money. Other parts of the world, that's I'm gonna go down to a 4-day week while I get the next release out. And at the bottom end, the kind of most obscure package I could find that I've ever actually used for anything, nobody does audio with .NET, but if you do, there is a package that does it. It's written by a guy called Mark Heath, lives in Southampton. He's getting $120 a month, which is not quit your job money, but it's a new laptop every couple of years. These are the sort of numbers we're talking about. Now, this ain't going to happen because this is capitalism. The winning move is not to give away money for the free stuff. And potentially the logistics of putting this model, you'd have to have meetings, you'd have to get lawyers and bankers and all this kind of stuff involved. But the numbers work up, and all we're doing is we are charging for the convenience of distributing free software. Just like we were with Linux and Red Hat and Slackware back in the 90s, the code is free. If you want to compile it yourself, get it from GitHub and build it. Yeah, go for it. If you want a nice, convenient, one-click download install version, yeah, I think companies that are making money should pay for that. Now, if you turn around with any existing package manager and say you're going to do this, you will upset the woodland animals because the thing used to be free and now you want to charge money for it, and that's not going to work. But there is something potentially happening in the next couple of years, which I think is, and it's not AI, it's something real, something that is actually going to make an impact. It is the WebAssembly system interface. WebAssembly is a big deal. WebAssembly is like, finally, we don't have to write JavaScript anymore if we want software to run in a browser. WebAssembly runs on servers now, because of course it does, because you can run it in a browser, someone's going to port it to a server. And the WebAssembly system interface is a way to write an image compression algorithm in Haskell and compile that to WebAssembly, and then consume that from a WebAssembly application written in Java that uses a front end, which is a WebAssembly application written in TypeScript, COBOL, C++. It doesn't matter. We have binary interoperability, which means that the days of, oh, I need to do JPEG compression, well, if I'm in Python, I use that package. If I'm in Java, I use that package. If I'm in .NET, no. It means there's a package on the web that does JPEG compression for you, whatever language you're working in, which means we're going to end up with a warehouse full of packages, cross-platform packages, and this is going to be a new thing. And of course, everyone is going to dive straight in and say, yeah, let's make it free, let's give it away to everybody, and then 2 years later, they're going to go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have made that free. Now, free as in beer is fantastic. Open source software is 25 years old. We've done free as in beer. There are people all over the world who are learning to code, writing software, resuscitating dead laptops using free as in beer software. It's fantastic, but we have an increasing number of project maintainers who are struggling to pay the bills with the state of the world, despite the fact that companies are out there making countless tens of billions of dollars off the software they gave away for free. We've done free as in speech. It's fantastic. We have open software that is protected by law that nobody can take away, nobody can lock up. But we also have vital components of internet infrastructure that are susceptible to social engineering and manipulation and security vulnerabilities. And I want to talk about a third kind of free, because I want to talk about a kind of free where you wake up on a Saturday morning and you're like, I have a free weekend. I don't have to go to work. I don't have to worry about security. I'm not going to get paged. I'm not going to check Slack messages. I can relax. I can enjoy what I'm doing. I know that next week I get to go back to working on stuff I enjoy. It's going to be sustainable. You're not worrying about security. You're not worrying about the future. We've done free as in beer. We've done free as in speech. I'd like us to think about free as in weekend. Thank you. And we do not have time for questions unless you can speak them faster than the speed of light and backtrack us by about 4 minutes. Folks, thank you so much for coming. I hope you all enjoyed that. Enjoy your evening. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll see you all then.